ready for some Bengals news? At the Growler, we got you. Hot takes, interviews from your host, Paul Danglo Jr.
All right, welcome to the latest edition of the Rewatch Reaction Show. Paul Danglo Jr. here with you, with our good friend Charlie Goldsmith. Charlie, what's going on?
How you doing?
I'm doing good. The season is officially over. Now it is officially off season. So now we can start talking about the off season because we haven't been doing that for months.
It's funny because this conversation did really start in like November. And then you remember that when like the season was over and then they got back on and then no one wanted to play the Bengals. It's been a fun little couple of months.
It's been a fun couple of months. We've sort of obviously been into off-season mode, but this was one last data point from the Super Bowl, and the Eagles just a blowout like I haven't seen like in any week, you know, where you see it, you're like, good God. And to see it with Patrick Mahomes, who just was rendered helpless in that first half as the Eagles just poured it on. What a stunning sight to see. And it felt like all of those close wins, the Chiefs, all the good luck and karma that they had built up over the course of this entire year, all just spilled out the other side on the law of averages and sort of one disastrous night in New Orleans for them, with the Eagles winning it. What a game, what a run by the Eagles.
So we're going to talk about lessons we learned and positional value and what could apply to the Bengals. But like, honestly though, like build a defense like the Eagles, good luck. You know, you might as well just find Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes while you're at it. What an incredibly well thought out, well built, well invested in roster. Such a perfect roster that like they spent all this money to get Bryce Huff to be the defensive end that took them over the top this year. And he was inactive yesterday. And like the guy they're paying $13 million to fix that pass rush was terrible and was a bust, and they still won the game because they had the best pass rush in football. Like, to me, that just sums up right there how special of a job the Eagles did building this roster.
Yeah, Howie Roseman, kudos, and coaching them up all the way down. I mean, this was a team. I think, you know, I'll start here because I think so much is obviously going to be based on the defensive side of the ball. The Eagles did what the Bengals want to do. Okay, they let the old coordinator go. They bring in a new coordinator, Vic Fangio. They paid him a lot of money. They made him the highest paid defensive coordinator in football, and rightfully so. He proved himself. But they go from a bottom five defense to a top five defense that looked absolutely unstoppable on Sunday, and really for most of the second half of this season. How do you do it, right? If this is it, like you're the Bengals, you're sitting here and you're saying, how do we do what the Eagles just did defensively? So for there, I'll say, well, wait, kind of where do you start, Charlie?
Just roster construction as a whole. Like, I agree, these turnarounds can't happen quickly. And while it would be, unrealistic to expect the Bengals next season to have a defense like the Eagles, it kind of is what Al Golden was brought in to do. And, we could talk about Zach Bond, a vision in free agency, using a player in a creative way and finding unexpected value there. We could talk about the importance of adding in a dynamic piece like CJ Gardner-Johnson or, the latest developments they've had up front. But I think what's most applicable and what on a rewatch stood out to me the most was man, these rookie corners were special. And, Quinyon Mitchell, the job he did, Cooper DeJean, pick six, what he did in the slot, the range he had on that pick, the way he plays like a safety in the nickel, his ability to jam Travis Kelce at the line of scrimmage, one of my favorite tacklers to watch in football. Like, what applies to me the most for the Bengals is what he did to coach up those two guys that well. And then one more Bengals thing too, just how well the whole group tackled. Like, all of that was a culture change, getting these new pieces to gel and fit and play with a certain style. That to me was the most impressive job that Vic Fangio did.
We've heard in the 31-minute press conference with Al Golden and proceeding one-on-ones after that and whatever, a lot of talk about tackling and young players playing with confidence and letting their instincts shine. And Vic does that better than anybody by playing what some would call a simplistic system. But just when you get pieces like this, which you just have all of these young athletic freaks that are out there and they're playing confident, knowing what they're doing and building those instincts throughout the course of the year in a system that isn't overwhelming them, boy, you just see it shine because they play so fast and they're just absolutely everywhere. Now that starts up front. with that defensive line, the way they get over. But you're right. I mean, I just feel like there's been a lot of thought when you think about rookie corners, and this is a Bengals conversation, and about young corners. What we just lived 2 years of excuses made about young corners, about look, well, they make these mistakes, but then it pays off in year 2. Every corner is going to make all these mistakes, but they'll eventually learn from it, and then they'll be great. And then you see 2 guys where the learning curve is minimal. And you see what DeJean and Mitchell come in and do, and you see how quickly it can. And so much of that is how can you get young corners playing instinctually to their athletic skill set and confidently out there. A year where we just watched the Bengals corners not look super confident, be doubting themselves a lot, and certainly communication busts that have been going on for the last 2 years. How does Al Golden get these current young cornerbacks, which aren't as young anymore, that has some experience, to start playing with a confident, instinctual style that can highlight how athletic they are? Because they are. They're freakishly gifted. Cam Taylor-Britt, DJ Turner, these guys are highly athletic. They are what they want them to be in terms of that. It's just, can you get them to play with that kind of confidence and knowledge and instincts in the system?
And what I love is Mitchell and DeJean are doing completely different things. Mitchell was like a perfect Bengals fit actually on all of our draft boards. And if they had better offensive line, or I guess the defensive line didn't really fit them at pick 18 where they were. But if they had a better offensive line, I think they probably would have taken Mitchell. He fit every criteria and check mark that they look for in a corner. And then it was about the play style and how he played and all those things, like you're saying. DeJean almost, so like when they came into Cincinnati and was that week 8, the defense was having a lot of highs and lows. It hadn't found itself. Avonte Maddox was their starting slot corner, and putting DeJean in the slot in that game was the moment that that the Eagles defense really became what it was this season. And like a lot's been made of like that 4th and 1 play on the Bengals end, but that 4th and 1 play, the tackle by DeJean on the Eagles end was what ended up locking this new role where, like, there was a lot of debate. DeJean fell to the second round because people thought he was a safety. The Eagles were like, let's use this safety skill set at the cornerback position. You saw that range on the interception. You saw that downhill violent ability, for example, on the tackle he had against Jamar Chase. It's funny, like, is this a Dax Hill conversation in the slot? Maybe. Cooper DeJean, Dax Hill. That's very interesting to think about when you see how Vic Fangio, yes, he had Mitchell fit his scheme perfectly, but then he made some changes to really unlock and embrace kind of the hybrid, unique style of guy he had in Cooper DeJean. And, can the Bengals do the same thing with Dax?
That is the thing to me. I would, go down the Dax Hill, conversation here and just say, would you change his position again? It's the one thing that holds me back, where this guy, who has struggled to get continuity and find confidence in that, right? Because he's had to constantly be thinking. And now it seemed like you finally got him just going out there playing and being himself on the outside and really showing a ton of potential. Yeah, maybe he should have been playing slot corner since his first year as a rookie like Cooper DeJean, right? Do you then come back and say, okay, Dax, let's change again. We're going to let Mike Hilton go, and we're going to put you in the slot. We think that's where you're best. Or is that not that big of a change? I think that's a really interesting conversation here, because Dax fits exactly what you're seeing here, and how to really get max value, I think, out of that position. And Hilton's proven the ability to kind of do all the tackling in the backfield stuff and all of that. But Dax could be the total package in that regard too. But do you risk taking him away from a place that he finally seemed to find himself in to do that?
Mike Hilton, in a lot of ways, changed the way I look at the slot corner position. What a Bengals career. Unbelievable. We could talk about that forever, but kind of what this Eagles defense reinforced to me is kind of something I've said before on this podcast. How I view football against these elite quarterbacks is, can you create 5 negative splash plays a game? And it just turned out that the 5 plays the Eagles needed were all those third downs strung together, and that's how you shut out the Chiefs in the first half. Slot corner, I really do view as one of those playmaking positions. You see that with Mike as a blitzer, but I think more importantly, what you saw from Cooper DeJean and all the ways they were using him and the turnovers he was creating show the impact of having even more of that specifically in coverage from the slot corner position. Now, Dax can definitely do it. Worth noting that the last time we saw Dax Hill on a football field, he was playing slot corner. I remember talking to you during that Ravens game, like, man, Dax looks pretty good. I don't think it's as drastic of a shift as, obviously safety to outside corner. You can talk yourself into, then DJ on the outside, and as opposed to paying $8 million, hoping he's the next Mike Hilton, hoping you hit on that criteria. And I'll add this too, watching Notre Dame's defense, I believe it was Jordan Clark, the guy they specifically brought in from Arizona State, kind of an aggressive, dynamic, playmaking corner. He's the one starter that Al went out through the portal and added to his defense. So this is something that he really puts a lot of stock into. He really likes that skill set, and kind of the Eagles defense shows the impact that playmaking skill set can have in coverage on the biggest stage.
Yeah, and they did it. I think the Bengals young corners can be that. Like I think that it's just all of them, I feel like, have been so disjointed. Like every single one of them has a kind of a weird disjointed story of flashes and then like rotations and all of this stuff. It doesn't feel like any of them have been able to go out there and just cleanly sort of take things over, outside of Cam, I guess. But his became very disjointed this year, much by his own doing. But like they all kind of have these different stories, and you're like, well, what does it look like if they just go out there? They have clear positional roles. They go and play. Can they be this group? I mean, can they go out there and be this group and play confidently, or are they flawed players? And that's why they have these disjointed early careers, because flawed players tend to have that. That's a big question, and I think we're going to find out, because I don't see them going out and paying anybody to go over top of these young corners. I think they're going to bank on it, partially because they have to financially kind of bank on those guys taking over that. We've talked about that with the mock offseason sheet. But it's going to be a big deal. I mean, they need those guys to look like these Eagles corners in their secondary have looked. That's how turnarounds happen, is you get a bunch of young guys that change the entire dynamic and start using their athleticism to confuse quarterbacks, get coverage sacks, and let everything else happen.
So remember in 2015 when the Reds had 5 rookies in the starting rotation, and it was like, this is the future, and then all of a sudden the clock runs out, none of them can pitch, and your rebuild fails, and you have to start all over again. Obviously, we don't know whether or not these corners, they could all be very good starters. Cam can be a Pro Bowler, or they all could not be starters on the next great Bengals team. We don't know, but this is a very interesting pivot point. Like, what this offseason was supposed to be was talking about extensions with Cam Taylor, Britt, and Dax Hill. And the ripple effect of that has us down the rabbit hole that we're in analyzing the Bengals offseason. Also, when you look at where, Dax and Cam are at contractually, like the Dax 5th-year options, a very interesting debate conversation that you could have. Cam obviously nearing the end now that he's up for an extension. Like, the Bengals have very little invested long-term in the cornerback position, such a massive position, such a pivotal position. Are they going to have to start over? Obviously, they'd like to not, but with these guys, or on the other hand, are you about to have to pay Cam Taylor, Britt, and Dax Hill, because they are about to break out? Like, to me, cornerback is the most interesting position for 2026 based on what we learned for 2025. And can they get these young guys going? How does that impact future decisions you make at cornerback? Like, all of this has so many different tangents and webs that it creates. And it kind of all ties back to a huge year for Cam, for Dax, for DJ Turner. Who the heck are these guys? And what does that mean for the next 5 years of the Bengals at the cornerback position?
Yeah. And do the Bengals just clear the decks to let them take over?
Or clear the decks and go somewhere else.
Yes. Right. And so I think that you're right. 2025 in season will be year of the cornerback and learning, in 2026. And this time next year, we'll be talking a lot about that position, whether we're talking about the latest round of extensions or about free agents and how they're going to fix that problem. They're going to they've placed a big bet on it in the way that they drafted, and that thing's got to pay off or the whole thing goes bust. Let's do this. I want to flip forward and talk a little bit about the defensive line. We've done a lot of this lately, but I don't know how you don't come away from the Super Bowl talking about them. I mean, what they did And it's a Bengals problem. This is where the Bengals are actively trying to rebuild. Like we just established, they're more than likely going to be leaning into the young players that they already have and have drafted high in the secondary. That feels like the direction they're going to go. But they need to rebuild on the defensive line. Hendrickson or no Hendrickson, however that works out, that's a whole other thing. You can diagnose that problem. I'm not a doctor, but you've got like all of these guys up there that need to be turned over. The edge, both defensive tackle. They don't have a defensive tackle right now. They don't have a starting defensive tackle. Chris Jenkins, McKinley Jackson, maybe, right? But I don't think you can sit here and say, oh, those guys are definitely, you want them as your starters on a good defense. Like, I don't know that they have 3 open positions. Miles Murphy, I guess, is filling one of them more than likely. However that makes you feel. All of that, though, they need to figure out a way to do something. And I wanted to just run down something from this Eagles defensive line group. This season, true pass set win rate for all of these guys, they are all of their major ones, except for Jordan Davis, who's just massive man pushing pile style, it wasn't as high. They were all over 15%. Okay. All of them over 15%, most much higher. Milton Williams up at 25% for the season. You saw them dominate. Jalen Carter obviously led them in pressures. He's at 16%. Nolan Smith really came on late. He was up at 19.3. Moro Ojomo, a 7th-round pick, came on. His win percentage was up at 24% in true pass sets. I mean, you just see these guys winning so often. They're all homegrown. They're all picks. They just throwing picks. They're young. You had Carter was the 9th overall pick in 23. Josh Sweat up there. He was a Philly pick in 2018 in the round 4. Milton Williams was a 3rd-round pick in 21. Nolan Smith was a 1st-round pick in 23. Ojomo, I mentioned he was a 7th rounder in 23. They found a late gem there. Jordan Davis, 13 overall in 2022. They just keep throwing picks and they're hitting. The evaluation is playing. And meanwhile, the Bengals, Trey Hendrickson, of course, his win rate well up there, up in the 25%. Everyone else 12% or less. And like, as you know, you've got to get more. You can't win this way. It's just remarkable when you put on the tape of these big moments, how much it is one guy, not even necessarily winning, but their rush forcing the pocket to move into somebody else, and it just discombobulating the entire play. You throw that with some of the coverage stuff that you talked about earlier, it plays in, and that's how you end up with it. It just stood out to me. All it is young go eat, right? Let these dudes go eat. Young, freak show, athletic dudes. Just let them go rush the quarterback. They went young. They threw all kinds of pitches at it and said, look, we're going to hit on some of these. Turns out they hit on a lot of them. No, it's an unbelievable hit rate. That said, just keep taking swings. All of this draft capital, go young and let them play fast. And you saw that on the line all day against the Chiefs.
What's funny is the Bengals tried. Like, they had the
Yep.
3rd highest paid defensive line in football. Backing them up was 1st-round pick Miles Murphy, 3rd-round pick Joseph Osai, 2nd-round pick Chris Jenkins, 3rd-round pick McKinley Jackson, former 3rd-round pick Zach Carter before he got cut. What I keep going back to, and this is something we discussed when we broke down Miles Murphy, is when I went through his game, like his season, he didn't have a signature move. And thinking about that, and then the more the Rams made me think about this a lot. And the Eagles, they have more talent than the Rams, but the Eagles fall into this too. Like, all right, Jalen Carter, do-it-all guy, would have been a top 5 pick for those weird off-the-field questions. But the other guys, I don't want to call them platoon players because they're better than that. But like, man, Sweat, the way he was ripping around the edge, and Smith, the way he kind of screams and flies around, and, obviously a speed guy at that size. You look at Milton Williams, who's just this elite athlete for his position. Jordan Davis, a bigger guy. Ejima, a stouter, the 7th-round pick, a stouter guy who very much fits a specific role. Brandon Graham, kind of that stronger, more edge-setty, physicality. All the pieces fit together, and it's a group that's complementary, and it's not a, betting on traits they did bet on traits, but it's not betting on traits to develop them to become something. It's getting guys who you know exactly what they are. Yes, that's betting on athleticism as well, but they clearly had very specific roles in mind when they drafted these guys or when they signed these guys. And then they ended up filling those exact roles. And the Bengals tried, but how many guys did they have filling a role that they didn't expect? You know, just beside playing against the run, Zach Carter trying to be a nose tackle. Like, that to me is the story of the Bengals defensive line. And, you know, that's why they're having new, you know, leadership, a defensive coordinator, defensive line coach, because they need to be so much better at that. And the Eagles are the perfect example of the best way to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it comes back to the evaluation, doesn't it? I mean, that's just it. It's like we come back to the evaluation and then getting everybody on board and then developing them the correct way and having that plan. You know, we hear all the time, you got to have everybody on board and it's got to work throughout. And that's why the coaches are involved so that everybody's on board with it. But so often it seems like it hasn't been, you know, and there's been that disconnect. And maybe that changes now when we get into new defensive line coach and Al Golden and everything else. Maybe it does, but you're right. You name off all the guys. If I took the names out and you just said the draft capital used in all of these, like, it sounds similar, but yet in the Bengals had opportunities to take most of these guys, actually, almost all of them, a couple, excluded there, but when they could have, but didn't view those guys as the right ones. And the evaluation is always, it's the year of everybody has their hand in the cookie jar. And that's kind of what it has been around here. So that it's the evaluation, it's the development, and you see what it looks like. It's just not that easy. Like you said at the top, yeah, go get Joe Burrow, right? You got to hit on all these and get them all to work together and start playing right. I don't think that stops you from continuing to throw at it. I mean, I just think they have to. There's no number of picks of defensive linemen, and really just trench players in general. I'd throw in offensive linemen on top of it, on the interior, and just there's not a number that I would say, oh, you need to stop. You got enough. Just if this is a deep draft at those positions, you see, fourth round picks, third round picks that do pan out. It does happen. It has happened around here in the past. Keep throwing. You just have to fix your lines. And that is where so much of everything can go. The Eagles live that way. Now, the Bengals aren't the only one. It's not, I mean, everybody wants to do that. But I just don't think from their perspective and where they are specifically at, just you got to keep trying. You can't stop swinging just because you've had failures. I don't think they will, but I just think that's important to remember, because people always fight back with me with like, well, they're terrible at drafting them. Well, at some point you got to draft them right. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Then they're just going to be terrible forever. Like, at some point you got to hit on, like you have hit here in the past, on guys, and not say, well, we suck at drafting, so I guess we should just never do it at that position. No, you have to keep taking shots at it and hope that you're going to get some hits to start to show up.
Yeah, I think in my mock offseason, your exercise that you set up, I signed 2 veteran edges. I signed a defensive tackle, first-round pick at defensive tackle, second-round pick at defensive end, and a fourth-round pick for another defensive tackle. I am an all-in believer on, it's like the starting pitching line. When you think you have enough, go get more. And specifically, I'll keep stressing adding guys who do at least, but really one thing at least really, really well, and being able to build a scheme around that. The flip side of this, the talking point in Kansas City today is the offensive line perspective. And that's another Bengals debate that's really interesting. And I mean, my hot take here is that Kansas City lost the Super Bowl because they whiffed on Wanya Morris and Kingsley Suamataia. Because they whiffed on their left tackles. They had to move Tooney outside. Tooney was a weak spot because he was one of the best guards just playing out of position. And then they picked on Caliendo at left guard. I kind of, for a newsletter I'll do later this week, I took a deep dive. The final 8 teams, how did they build their offensive lines? And the guard position in particular, because that's particularly relevant to the Bengals. The 2 teams that threw the most at guard through free agency were actually the teams with the worst guards, the Texans and the Rams. The Rams are paying a guy to be a $17 million backup guard, and the Texans have a high-priced guy plus a first-round pick backing them up. Because what that position in particular comes down to is unheralded plucking guys that other teams are missing on through free agency on a $5 million contract, or then through a second, third, or fourth round pick. Like, the Eagles, they had a second round pick in Landon Dickerson, who was coming off a major injury, who there was some projection with it. It's finding Mekhi Becton. Throwing money there isn't necessarily the answer. It's finding your Trey Smith. The Bengals have to do that. And like you said, I couldn't agree more. They have new leadership now on the offensive line because they weren't doing that. It's something they need to be doing. I'm all in on putting as many resources and more on the defensive line. But the offensive line, if you're going to build a good one, you just need to be able to do it at an elite level, at kind of building a lower mid-tier interior of your offensive line kind of on a budget.
And they're in a good position, I think, if they can do something they haven't done in, I don't know, decades, it feels like.
Right.
Find a like quality starting offensive lineman in on day 3 or late day 2. Like, it just seems like it's an impossible thing to do around here. Maybe Scott Peters is the guy to start doing that and making it happen, but like, that's why these offensive line coaches are so valuable. That's why you hear so often, like, it's the second most important position beyond the head coach on the staff. Is like, it's so expensive and debilitating if you can't do it right, if you can't draft and develop and find those guys and recognize them and then make them fit in your systems. You have to at some point get that, or else you're going to have to keep going back up. But I think they're in a good position if they can start doing it. With you've got your tackles set, you're good there. You've still got a veteran in Ted Karras here. You've got the ability to plenty of money to go spend and get a solid starting guard and let a bunch of other people compete. Have a mix of Cody Ford, whatever. Maybe a guy you pick can rise up in the spirit of competition in year 1, or maybe he's forced into play a few games and plays well during his rookie season, and you can start to build. And he comes into his own. They're in a good position where, if they do it right in free agency, which shouldn't be that hard to do, they're not going to be reliant, but they can take a couple of swings there too and see if they can finally start to get that asset and make that work with one of these later picks or day 2 or whatever that can come in and actually grow into the role and actually give you something and not just be the latest disappointment that you never really hear from. That's going to be, it's all big. It all goes back to the same stuff. Like, if you're going to get there, you gotta get there through the draft. When the Bengals are good, they draft well. And when they're not good, they don't draft well. They haven't drafted well lately, and all eyes will be on April again.
Another thing back to the game, like, I'm going to override the take I just said. Like, all right, reason B, maybe the Chiefs lost is because Morrison Sumatia flopped and the offensive line was terrible. But the Bengals offensive line wasn't great either this year. We spent so much time talking about that group's flaws, and the Bengals offense actually played a heck of a game when they played Philadelphia in week 8. Like, if it wasn't for the worst play call of the season by Zach Taylor and one of Joe Burrow's worst picks, the 4th and 1 that we all know. Thank you for the laugh. I'm sure everyone at home had that same reaction.
Yeah.
And the pick, the deep ball that Burrow forced that got flukily swatted to a safety. I mean, the Bengals were moving the ball in that game. The offense was playing really efficiently. And going back through it, like, they maybe asked their offensive line to block twice, like, all game. And I mean that as a good thing. Like, Andy Reid yesterday, it seemed like they tried to lean on the RPOs early. The Eagles had a plan for the RPOs, and then there was nothing else in the quick game playbook. And that was probably because, with Travis Kelce struggling as much as he was, they didn't have another matchup that they trusted. What it was so much about for the Bengals against Philadelphia was, like, they were scheming up Gesicki or Jamar against Blankenship over and over and over again. They got Gesicki against Devontae Maddox. They had so many of these. They had Jermaine Burton run a go ball against a slow corner in Slay. Like, they found these matchups and these routes that they won with, so Joe Burrow could trust that he was able to get rid of the ball immediately. Another reminder that, like, weapons can help protect your quarterback too, and that's how the Bengals had a really great plan because of matchups they had and targets they could count on to move the ball. But then when you're a team like the Chiefs that doesn't have any matchups on paper that are winning, with the Eagles secondary playing as well as it was, and with no real difference makers on the Chiefs skill position player group, well, then, the defensive line takes over and the rest is history.
Yeah, we have a few examples we can run through for our folks on the YouTube channel of exactly what you're talking about. Start here with this one. Which one is this? This is, I think this is Chase. Chase
I love
underneath. Yeah.
I love
Quick
this
win.
play. Look at the motion to set up the stagger, to get him on the slot corner, and then just a bang angle before you even know it. They ran this play for Tyler Boyd all the time, I remember. And now Jamar in the slot's doing it as well. Waiting for to snap, hike, balls out. Milton Williams and Jalen Carter can't even win because the Bengals found a matchup and used motion to their advantage and used personnel groupings to their advantage and found an opportunity. The Bengals are doing this all game. There was a lot of
Gesicki here, one hand. This was a beautiful play here.
Gesicki against Avonte Maddox. Like, what is Avonte Maddox supposed to do? By the way, unbelievable Mike Gesicki game against Philly. Like, what a great pay Mike G film breakdown to when you go back through some of these plays against Philly, look at the one-handed catch. But what that play was about was a matchup that the Bengals created based on personnel and alignment and the threat of Jermaine Burton running deep and occupying the corner. And you found the one thing Burton did well, and that opened up some space. And Andy Reid just had none of these answers yesterday. Again, they lost the game because it was Zach's worst play call of the season on 4th and 1. That was a big part, but Zach did a lot well. Here's another example. Use the stagger, set Jamar up into a weak spot of the zone, and just get rid of the ball immediately. There was no window for the Eagles defensive line to take this over. So one more thing I'll say too. I don't think on this play in particular, but Eric All played a ton in this Eagles game. And of course, they had to scrap the game plan because T got hurt on Friday or wherever it was. That was this game, but a ton of 12 personnel to force the Eagles to get bigger personnel on the field, which forced Reed Blankenship to play more in coverage than the Eagles wanted him to, which gave the Bengals opportunity to create these matchups. And that's what the Chiefs didn't do. A reminder of the importance of the Bengals continuing to do that in 2025. And then having, more skill guys than, having your Mike Gesicki's. Zach Moss had some nice check, probably his best check down game of the year in this game. Having your answers to have quick options against a team that's not going to allow plays down the field and against a pass rush that will beat you if you give them time.
And specifically in beating the Chiefs, something that Patrick Mahomes talked about after this, and something that Bengals fans and Lou Anarumo knows really well. Force Patrick Mahomes to play patient pocket football. And sometimes he very much struggles that, specifically when you can get home with that. I mean, the Eagles notably not blitzing or blitzing once or whatever it ended up being, and still being able to get all that pressure is exactly how you do it. It's the equivalent of when drop 8 threw Patrick Mahomes into, discombobulation, and everyone said Patrick Mahomes they figured it out, right? He's broken. They figured out how to stop him. Well, he's done a good job throughout his career, I think, of dealing with that issue of people trying to force him to do that. And he's done a much better job of being a patient quarterback. But sometimes, especially if you get the lead, then he tries to become Superman Patrick Mahomes and presses and loses some of his patience. You saw it here. You saw it when the Bengals beat Patrick Mahomes, specifically in the AFC Championship game, and then the Tampa Bay Super Bowl as well, where they're just able to get after him, not having to bring as many blitzes and pressures and leave all the bodies back in the back end, forcing him to be patient. And I'm sure Patrick will come back better. I'm sure he won't make some of the mistakes, and they'll be motivated by this and all of that. But that's kind of been the very few answers have ever existed for Patrick Mahomes. But the one that on the biggest stages have been exactly that. And Lou Anarumo knew that and used it to his advantage a couple of times.
It's funny that we're talking about Vic Fangio too, because quick trip down memory lane through Burrow's career. 2021, all the defenses that gave him trouble were the Fangio style, the Fangio tree defenses. Back when that was like the talk of the league, the Fangio system. Then in 2022, the story of Burrow's season was the way he was patient, the way he was, what was the line, looking for his checkdowns more quickly and being more aggressive with checkdowns. And it was the year of the checkdown. And that patient Burrow was what shredded that patient too high Fangio system. And over the last few years, that system is kind of, we've evolved towards, the Ravens, McDonald's, sim pressures, blitzes, that kind of stuff is more in vogue, but you still have Fangio running this scheme. And then when the Bengals played them in week 8, they start out with a 17-play touchdown drive. Then they have an 11-play field goal drive that should have been a touchdown drive. And then to open halftime, they have a 13-play touchdown drive. So that's still a club in the Bengals bag. It's a very fun matchup against it's fun. I did it before the Eagles game. It's fun to go back through these chess matches and the specific way they forced Burrow to play. And Mahomes wasn't able to play that style, or more importantly, Andy Reid, maybe the best offensive coach of this generation, didn't have enough answers with the Chiefs offense to play that style, whether or not it was from a game plan design or just didn't have a guys who could win the matchups. I mean, that's what had the Chiefs offense as stuck as it was.
Yep. Processing winning on the outside quickly can be the quickest answer to offset. And that's something that we have heard from Bengals coaches and seen the way that they play and the way that they have invested for years and years and years. And we'll see if that continues, which leads us into the fact that the offseason is officially upon us. And we'll see how they invest. Do they invest in the line through extending Trey Hendrickson? Do they invest in winning quickly on the outside through keeping T. Higgins? What do they do? Where do they draft? Where do they go in free agency? We will look into all of that. Of course, we're going to start taking a little closer look at some of the key free agent positions here in the coming weeks, Charlie and I. So keep an eye out for that. And of course, we're not too far from emergency pod season, where you just never know when something's going to pop up. So those are always going to be coming your way. Make sure you are reading the chalkboard, subscribing to Charlie's free Substack. Great stuff. Reds kicking off this week in spring training. So if you want to get some Reds insight, there's plenty of that there, of course, and all the Bengals stuff. You know it. He's just giving you the goods, man. Just go there. Just take it. You got it. It's like a good check down. Sometimes when someone gives you something nice, you just got to accept it and know this is great. Make a profit every day, right? So
quick
right.
thing I want to stress is that the Chiefs were down 24-0 in the second quarter, and they were trying to get their first drive. And you know what Andy Reid does? He calls a screen to Samaje Perine.
Yeah,
And
that's how you get it going.
That's how you get it going. And I wonder if that was an Andy Reid's mind. I know how to start a massive comeback here. The screen to Samaje Perine will turn around this game. And unfortunately, Samaje is 1 for 2 in extremely high leverage, super important postseason games on screens late in the second quarter.
That's great. Yeah, Philly not having any of that. All right, Charlie, appreciate it, man. Happy official offseason to you. And we'll talk to you next time. Have a good one.
See ya.